Good evening and welcome back to Checkpoint here on KTN News. We are glad that you're watching. We're discussing the Building Bridges Task Force, and tonight I am with the Joint Secretary of this task force. His name is Ambassador Martin Kimani. Before we went on break, we were talking about the issues around the independence, if you like, of this. And somebody has actually asked a question, a direct question, and says, that's Gracious Lumwami, how do we, or how do you as a task force ensure that this is not used to bring about this agenda of referendum talk? Because we see at the end we'll be told these are the issues Kenyans want changed, so let's change the constitution. How do you respond to that referendum question and it being linked to this big rubber stamp on it?
Well, we're going to listen to Kenyans, and we're going to make recommendations as per a task force does. And these recommendations are going to be taken forward by various institutions. Any changes that come to Kenya in terms of legal changes, procedural changes, or constitutional changes will have to go through a long chain involving multiple institutions. Including the people themselves. So this task force does not have the ability to force on any Kenyan any particular solution. It has only the ability to listen to Kenyans and offer advice.
So if most Kenyans say they'd want the constitution changed because maybe they want punguza mizigo or they want something else to happen, would a recommendation read, let the country go into a referendum to change this and this because a majority of people feel this is a problem?
Well, the recommendations have to do with what can we do to build unity on the basis of reducing ethnic antagonism, evolution, fighting corruption, the variety of areas.
Yeah.
And so we have not been asked to come up with a political solution to solve for the political class what it considers to be its most pressing issues. We've been asked to take these 9 issues that concern everyday Kenyans. Kenyans lose their lives from a variety of these issues and lose hope and lose a sense of cohesion and unity. So that's what we're focused on. And we're not focused on trying to come up with political bargains or political structures. We're here to look at these issues and find the most innovative solutions we can find to solving them.
So you're sticking to the issues. Earlier you talked to me about being open to hear more from Kenyans in terms of what they see to be the issues. So if says something like expanding the executive or a parliamentary system becomes every place you have a sitting or a hearing, everyone is talking about it, or they think this is what would change, would then that make it to recommendation? Or would they be strictly on your 9 points and perhaps make note of other things you've heard? I think is what Paul would want to know.
You know, if we dial the issue back from the daily politics that are going on, the issues we're dealing with were not created last year or this year. They've been with us for some time. And a variety of solutions have been tried. In fact, I think Kenya is one of the most consistently, a country that has tried so many reforms and has been an almost continuous process of reform since I was a kid, right? And a lot of these reforms have worked, a lot of others haven't. And so I think our job is to figure out what are the penetrating, innovative ways in which we can find ways to bring Kenyans closer together. It doesn't have to end up in politics. And I think if there's one thing I have heard His Excellency say very strongly, the Right Honorable Raila say very strongly, and the major political leaders from the Deputy President onwards, is we have to chill from the politics and think of our country. It's our country. And think of our country and what do we want from it. If you look at the political events in Kenya and the level of political rhetoric, if you did a mathematical calculation, there are very few countries on earth that have this level of political speech, which is a good thing. That's what Kenya is. But at the end of the day, building a nation and a republic is more than the accommodations of political elites. And that's why I think this task force has such a unique responsibility and such a unique opportunity, because the handshake on March 9th cut across against the grain. It went against the grain of where we thought we'd been heading towards. And so I think the leadership is listening with a particular way of listening to Kenyans.
But the concern then becomes, you may in the end come up with a very beautiful, if I may put it that way, report, concise, getting into every issue. But the biggest problem, it is not to come up with this report, is whether it's implemented, because our past also is checkered with reports that are gathering dust. You have the TJRC that went extensively into some of the issues, again, you're going to look back into. So that some say, why not start? The first recommendation of this committee should be implement TJRC. Why isn't that being implemented? You look at you're talking about a good environment politically, post-2008, after the joint government, you had Kibaki and Raila at the time. Again, the National Accord, a lot of those recommendations, only the political type of recommendations that were creating positions, all that, we saw expediency in fulfilling that. The rest, not so. So that question remains, so you do all this. What if it suffers the same fate we've seen so many others do?
Well, it's always possible for what you do to not lead to the changes you hope for. But that doesn't mean you don't do it. And we're going to try the best we can, in the most honest way we can, and we're going to offer our advice and hope that it is listened to. When I look at His Excellency, the President right now, in his war against corruption, many Kenyans have grown so tired and so exhausted with corruption, and many had even given up on there being a possibility of doing anything about it. But now it's being tackled with a lot of vigor and a lot of energy. So I think there is sufficient opportunity for big changes to happen if they're needed. But our job is to listen to Kenyans. And so all we're asking is for Kenyans to engage with us as constructively as they can. We all have a sense of fear that what we try and what we think and what we want will not come to be. And I think that is deserved because our history has disappointed us so much. But I think it's time to try. We have to keep trying.
Okay, so stay optimistic.
Stay optimistic and own our country.
Let's go through some of the issues on the 9-point agenda to look at, some would argue, what is the need to go deep when some of these things perhaps even the president has the power to do something on now. If we can put up that list for me, please, Director. The national ethos and inclusivity. So there has been an argument around, for instance, you have National Cohesion and Integration Commission. These are things NCIC could very well, we have that institution, be able to canvass, deal with, and actually do its work it's mandated to do, so that why does it need then again your commission or task force looking into something that is under the purview of an institution?
First, I think that institution has an incredibly important job in Kenya, and I commend them for the work that they've been doing. Of course, part of their work is to listen to Kenyans and to take advice from any particular. We're going to have advice on this particular challenge of ethnic antagonism.
But do you think they failed, in a sense?
No, I don't think they failed. I think...
Many would say they only hear of them in press conferences about hate speech, and that's it.
No, I appreciate the work they've done on hate speech, because that's a very real thing. And I appreciate the efforts that they've made. I think the issue here is not that the institutions have failed. The issue here is, can we capture this moment? Can we capture this moment? Can we capture the moment that was provided by the March 9th handshake? Because it's a moment that captured the imagination of Kenyans. It's a moment that everywhere you go, you talk about building bridges. People tell you, yes, the handshake, and they're excited by it. So that's all we're trying to do, is to take advantage of that moment, to find some issues and put them forward.
Let's talk about inclusivity, for instance. Some people talk about inclusivity in government, in parastatals. You find in some ministries one ethnic community dominating senior positions and a significant number that you're just going through. It's one community. And they say the president has power to deal with this in his government. The two-third gender principle, which has never been operationalized. The president has the numbers in parliament, and you'd imagine the goodwill for there to be that inclusive, operationalization of the two-thirds, not more than two-thirds gender rule, so that in what he can do, he is not doing, or he's not been seen to have that political will. So what other inclusivity are we looking for from the past that can be dealt with today?
Well, let me not go much into answering questions for leaders, because I think they sufficiently address these questions. I think President Kenyatta has shown a great openness and willingness to be inclusive in terms of his appointments and in terms of his activities. So the way I judge him as my president is the work that this administration is doing. Is it being done all over the country? And the answer is yes. Is he traveling and listening to Kenyans all over the country? And the answer is yes. In fact, you've even heard people from his own quote backyard, the ethnic backyard, saying that
they're marginalized.
That they've not gotten the attention that they need. I think this administration has done an incredible job. And now, beyond the administration and beyond our present leaders, the Constitution has created a formula for revenue allocation. Today, the money that comes to your county doesn't have to do with whether you voted for the government in power or not. It's a formula that is calculated mathematically for the money to be sent to your county. And I think that's a huge step for Kenya.
Okay. One more issue we look at: elections and divisive elections. It's a huge one. It's in fact why we got to the handshake, because of that. But what worries Kenyans is, despite you had the National Peace Accord touch on elections, the Kriegler commissions with nations that are ignored. We are told not to change laws an hour to an year to an election. Look at what we did. Even last year, the political class, ahead of the elections, was the joint parliamentary meeting, again, with more addressing elections. So what is this that will get Kenya out of this cycle that has been violent? And in fact, one of the questions somebody had put to us tonight was what they'd want to know, away from you gathering all these views, is the justice for the men and women who were killed and maimed pre-2017 general election, or during that period. That, so do we forget that and talk about the future, and yet there were injustices? That he was saying what he's concerned about is justice for those people. So again, to the question of what will be different if all of these people have sat down, reports, but they are ignored. They look the other way when it comes to winning an election. And those are two questions. As you answer the justice one, I know I've a mouthful there.
These are important questions. First, to the person who asked that question, let me tell them that for any Kenyan to die during an election is a tragedy. And it is wrong for any Kenyan to die or be killed during an election. It is wrong for there to be politics that are so divisive and so aggressive and so manipulative that they seek to actually foment division between Kenyans. But let me say, Sophia, and I know people are so concerned, as we lament some of the difficulties we've had, and we've had very big ones, all the way from 2008 going forward, and even before that, we need sometimes as Kenyans to see what moment are we in and where do we live. We live in the Horn of Africa, one of the toughest, most conflict-prone regions in the world. We've managed, in a region where democracy has such a deficit, to fight for democracy, to fight for multi-party democracy. We have shown the ability to go down towards very disastrous ends, and at the end pull back and try and re-engage together as Kenyans. So I think, Sophia, when all is said and done, even as I'm sad about what has happened in the past, I feel very proud of Kenya, because we have somehow managed to keep it together and to keep looking forward. And even now, this effort that we're trying to undertake, and others are also undertaking in different institutions, is all the time so characteristic of how Kenyans try and come together. And so I think the issue will not be just what the Building Bridges Task Force does, but all the variety of institutions, especially those that are specially mandated by the Constitution, will do between now and the coming years to actually settle this issue of divisive elections.
You have Frederick Okango from Punguza Mizigo tweeting, the task force is unconstitutional and should be immediately degazetted in order to save the public from any repercussions, losses, and unnecessary public financial costs that shall be incurred by it. And his party leader has also actually tweeted, I just saw it here. So this unconstitutional tag of your task force is one that keeps coming up in a number of tweets that I'm seeing. I have a crew quote saying, after giving the BBI task force ample time since its formation and upon following their plans and studying their terms of reference, we conclude that it is an amorphous, duplicitous, directionless, confusing, and unconstitutional body. It's a harsh criticism there. What do you say to that?
Well, I say to that person to think a bit better of his country. I'm not a politician. That to me sounds like politics. It's okay to have that view. And indeed, one can have that view. You're allowed to have that view. But as I said at the beginning of this program, the government is allowed to have task forces. At the core of government and at the core of the Constitution is participation and listening. And the participation is not only for constitutional bodies. It's not only Parliament or only the NCIC or only ministries that can draw on expertise and listen to Kenyans.
I want to ask you this as we bring this to a close. Your recommendations, there are those who'd say, would you have a time frame for implementation? For instance, to say these are changes or laws or whatever we believe that should take effect after 2022? Or, will you give that kind of clarity in terms of how you've been able to hear the things that you've heard from Wananchi and how they should be handled?
Yeah, well, the task force has a time on the calendar.
It's a short time, 1 year.
It's a short time. We're not mandated. We're not thinking of our work in relation to the 2022 elections.
Okay.
We're thinking of our work in relation to the issues we've been given. And what I would like to say, since I think we're finishing, is there are always a lot of doubts in Kenya, and we all express them. But to me, this BBI is a chance to be heard, is another avenue to give your ideas, and we're going to be listening. And as a group, the advisors and the secretaries are very optimistic because we have seen great leadership, and we have seen leadership able to change the course from heading towards disaster towards heading towards hope.
Yeah.
And we have faith in that.
You have faith in that. I want to briefly repeat for us that email address. I think we've been running it on screen, on our scrolls there, that people can write, because one of the things you've said is that you are open to hear from Kenyans across the board. So what is the address again? It's
BBI at citizensupport.go.ke.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, what is it you want the take-home for Kenyans watching tonight? I mean, we've talked about a number of issues. You live in this country, you know what's going on in the political domain and follow conversations and concerns of Kenyans. In fact, one was saying, I don't want to know about building bridges. I want to know how the cost of living will go down. They're like, how will someone answer that question for me? But what you'd want people to take home, and perhaps your assurance with this task force that at the end of your time, this is your promise and word to Kenyans.
There are very few nations that can genuinely call themselves great today and through history. Most countries and most nations have just passed by and no one even remembers their name. For us to make Kenya a country that is truly great, we have the potential, but we're not there. For us to be truly great, we have to wrestle with the big problems. These are not unique problems. We're not the only people who've had these problems. We're not the only country that's been poor or ridden by conflict or divisive elections. We're not. What makes us different from others is whether we're willing to face them, to come together and find some solutions. And I think we're being called to greatness. And that's a hard and bitter path. And so I don't blame any Kenyans for feeling disappointed, sometimes cynical. But we have the chance now to build something. And I think we should take that chance.
All right. Many thanks for being on Checkpoint tonight.
Thank you,
It has been a pleasure hosting you. Ambassador Martin Kimani, who is a joint secretary of the Building Bridges Initiative, that task force formed earlier this year. They have 1 year to conduct those sittings. So the next one will be where?
Will be in Kitui and Machakos.
When is that?
On the 12th.
On the 12th.
The week of the 12th.
Of
this month.
Okay, so I will keep covering and, of course, seeking answers as well as you continue with your work. Thank you. And you for staying with us and for watching. I'll read some of your comments as we wind up later on. But first, I want to pave way for my colleague Robinson Okenya, who's coming up after this break with